If you want to dominate your fantasy draft this year, you're in the right place. Because the 7 players in this video have real paths to genuine league winning upside. These guys could legit break fantasy football this year, and I'll walk you through exactly why. And if you're not familiar, I'm Sal Vetcher. I've been helping people win their fantasy leagues for nearly 8 years, and I plan to do the same for you in this video. And let's start things off with the Denver Broncos second round rookie running back RJ Harvey, because I mean, this guy is in some rare company in terms of the production that he had in college football, and it kind of goes a little bit unnoticed. Okay, for starters, let's look at this. In college, as you can see right here, back-to-back seasons of 1,500 rushing yards and at least 18 touchdowns. When you actually combine what he did last year as a rusher with over 1,500 yards and a receiver with nearly 300 yards, this guy was putting up 1,800 total yards last year, and he did it on just like 250 carries. Extreme efficiency, nearly 7 yards per carry, but that doesn't even get into the best parts of his game. Because this dude is not only efficient, not only productive, again, back-to-back seasons of over 1,500 total yards, but he's so damn explosive. Because just look at this tweet right here by Dan Brugler. In terms of carries of 10 plus yards, your explosive breakaway runs in college the last 2 years, RJ Harvey ranked number 1 with 5 more than Ashton Jeanty, top 10 overall pick in this year's draft class. Carries of 20 plus yards, he had the exact same amount of 20 plus yard explosive runs as Ashton Jeanty. The guy is, in terms of explosiveness, that's why Sean Payton drafted him and loved him. He has it. He checks the boxes. And then you go over to his athletic testing. Like, he shows up to the NFL draft, a little bit of an older prospect at 24 years old. He went to a smaller school at UCF, so people are concerned, but he checks in 205 pounds. Okay, that's fine. It's nothing crazy. It's ideally maybe a little bit bigger, but it's not small by any means. But his testing was massive for him. A 4.4 40 time, his 91st percentile speed. The burst that we saw it based on those explosive plays and the rate of them in college, 88th percentile in terms of player profiler. This is nerd talk for just saying he's like a top 10% athlete for his size, 205 pounds, to attend the combine, which is massive because this is already a guy who like 20% of his runs went for an explosive gain of 10 plus yards in college, and now he's also an athlete. This is when the buzz starts for RJ Harvey in the draft process as, oh, maybe this guy isn't like a 5th round pick. Instead, maybe he's a 3rd round pick, but he ended up landing in the 2nd round with Sean Payton and the Broncos. They took him 60th overall. He gets into this Sean Payton offense, and it's pretty clear that at least by the time that they drafted him, he was going to be the RB1 on this team, right? Javonte Williams was gone, as you can see right here. Obviously, they end up adding later in free agency J.K. Dobbins, which complicates some things, but with Javonte Williams gone, that's 191 touches gone. Javonte, by the way, was top 5 in running back targets and receptions last year, so that's gone. The competition, at least to start, was only Audric Estime, Jaleel McLaughlin, guys with basically none or very little draft capital behind them. But as I mentioned, of course, then they added J.K. Dobbins, who is a legitimate veteran running back, right? This is a guy who started last year with the Chargers very hot. He dealt with injuries down the stretch. He became less efficient down the stretch, but those first 2 to 4 weeks of the season, highly efficient, highly explosive of a runner. So we can't just wipe J.K. Dobbins off as like a guy who won't be involved here. J.K. Dobbins, I think, is a nice option in fantasy drafts, especially if you can get him in like round 11 or 12 where he normally goes. We like RJ Harvey here, but that doesn't mean we can't like both of these guys if the value is right. But with all that said, they didn't spend a 2nd round pick on RJ Harvey, and they just kind of waited until the later parts of free agency to get J.K. Dobbins. Like, if they really liked J.K. Dobbins and saw him as a true workhorse, they probably would have got him back in March before the draft and gave him a decent contract. They didn't do that. They spent the 2nd round draft capital on RJ Harvey, and this is just a reminder that Sean Payton, this is Ryan Heath on Twitter here, Sean Payton has only drafted 4 running backs before day 3 as a head coach. Reggie Bush, 2nd overall, Mark Ingram, right, 28th overall in the 1st round, Alvin Kamara, 67th overall in the 2nd round, and RJ Harvey. What do these guys have in common? Alvin Kamara, top 10 fantasy seasons left and right. Mark Ingram, multiple. We're talking 2 to 3 to 4 top 10 fantasy seasons. Reggie Bush had multiple top 10 fantasy seasons. The average running back finish for a starting running back under Sean Payton is a top 12 fantasy back. That's what RJ Harvey is walking into this year. And oh yeah, it also helps that like he maybe has the best offensive line in football. I would give that to the Eagles, but this is like a top 3 to 5, no doubt about it, offensive line in Denver. Now, we did talk about J.K. Dobbins. Of course, he is somebody that, again, in like round 10, 11, 12, really closer to round 11 and 12, that I am thinking is appealing this year. This is a guy who has only played, though, like we have to get this straight, right? You look at in terms of last year, he played 13 games. That was his healthiest season in like the last 3 to 4 years, and he still missed 4 games last year. He's only played in 37 out of a possible 85 games in his career, so I don't really see J.K. Dobbins going out there and being the 250 to 300 touch running back that's really going to squeeze RJ Harvey for touches. And you can check out this tweet from Neil Orford right here on Twitter. Again, it's a nice follow. You can check him out. J.K. Dobbins in 2024. So the first 2 weeks of the season, this is what we were talking about earlier. For the Chargers, he came out, nice matchups against the Raiders. He looked awesome. He was 2nd in the NFL in explosive run rate to start the season, but from week 3 on, his explosive run rate went from 2nd in the NFL to just 43rd. Again, this was a guy coming off of an Achilles injury. The idea there is that you're going to be fresher to start the year. The more wear and tear you put on that Achilles, the less explosive you become. That's what we saw last year out of Dobbins. The good thing is that we we've actually gotten to see both of these guys play in a preseason game. The first preseason game for the Broncos where their starters played, and this is what happened. RJ Harvey ended up starting the game with the first team offense ahead of J.K. Dobbins, and he played 63% of the starter snaps. He saw 9 opportunities to just 1 for Dobbins. Now, I've seen some people out there like Benjamin Allwright have reported that, oh, J.K. Dobbins was supposed to start, but he couldn't find his helmet. I don't know if that was a joke. I don't know if that was real, but even if he couldn't find his helmet, he found it shortly after, and despite that, Harvey still saw 9 opportunities to just 1 for Dobbins with the first team offense. I think J.K. Dobbins is going to be the better pass protector. I think he'll come in on pass protection downs. Any other downs where they're trying to run the ball or actually get the running back involved in the passing game, probably RJ Harvey. So when I see, as of this recording, RJ Harvey going as the 55th overall player in the 5th round, I think that's actually pretty fair. Like, if you told me he was a 4th round pick, I would say that that's also pretty fair, but it starts to get a little bit pricey. But as a 5th round pick right now, going next to guys like David Montgomery, Patrick Mahomes across different positions, Joe Mixon, who still has some injuries banged up, DeAndre Swift in a backfield that could be anybody's in Chicago. Yeah, I think RJ Harvey has a ton of upside here when you factor in the offensive line, ascending offense, what Sean Payton does for running backs, and the 2nd round draft capital. He could break fantasy this year. And so could Drake London at the wide receiver position, because I mean, this guy already broke out last season, right? And look, he was a guy who was able to put up a massive season of 100 receptions, despite for some of those weeks and stretches of games with Kirk Cousins looking disgusting. But that didn't stop Drake London from finishing at 16.5 fantasy points per game, 13th overall amongst the wide receiver position. If you scroll over to his actual production last year, it was massive. He was top 5 in targets. He was top 10 in receptions. He broke the 100 reception mark. Only 7 receivers did that. He was top 5 in receiving yards. Everything looked great for this guy. His efficiency was also there. For what it's worth, he was just one of 3 players to put up multiple games of 150 yards. So obviously the upside's there as well. If you're curious, those other players were Jamar Chase, who you probably could have guessed, and actually Amon-Ra St. Brown as well were the only other players besides Drake London to have multiple 150-yard performances. Now, Drake London was also 3rd in the NFL with 157 targets last season, while actually leaving like one of those games with an injury. When you start to look at some of his percentages, like target share, 29% of his team's targets, 6th in the NFL. 30% of his routes run ended up in a target. So if he ran a route on average, like 1 out of every 3 times he ran a route, he was getting targeted. Elite, top 3 in the NFL. But here's the thing I find maybe the most interesting. Drake London earned 42% of this team's red zone target share, led the entire NFL in red zone target share. So what does that mean? 4 out of 10 times that they're in the red zone throwing the ball, it's going to Drake London. That's how you get these like number 1 overall player, number 1 overall wide receiver outcomes, is the touchdown, spiking for like a 13 touchdown, 14 touchdown season. Drake London's getting the red zone usage to see that. And honestly, his efficiency was just as strong. Check this out. He ranked top 10 in yards per route run last season, and he was 6th in the NFL in yards per route run against man coverage. And I mean, new offensive coordinator from last year, Zach Robinson, just kind of knew where to put Drake London to get the most success out of him. He was putting him in the slot a lot. You can see right here, horizontal breaking routes are insanely potent for fantasy football, according to Fantasy Points data on Twitter. 2024 leaders in yards per route run against horizontal breaking routes. So these are your in-breaking routes over the middle of the field oftentimes. Number 1, A.J. Brown. I mean, he just dominates a lot of the time in man coverage, middle of the field routes. Number 2, and very close to A.J. Brown, was Drake London. He's getting more usage out of the slot. That's where you're going to see a lot of stuff unlocked, because you go up against like the 3rd best cornerback on a team. You have the whole field to work with rather than on the sidelines, just one side of the field. And that's exactly what we saw to Drake London, right? He ended up seeing the 13th most slot snaps. Over 35%, 38% to be exact, of his routes and snaps came out of the slot last year, which was a major bump up from the previous season when Arthur Smith was his offensive coordinator. I think a lot of us can say that new offensive coordinator, Zach Robinson, who came over from the Rams the year before, was a massive benefit to the offense and Drake London. And just to drive this point home even more, check out this tweet from my friend Chris O'Brien on Twitter. He says, Drake London led all outside receivers in slot yardage with 563 in 2024, wheels up for 2025. Now, what does this mean, outside receivers? It means guys who saw the majority of their snaps, over 50% on the outside. Drake London, when he got moved into the slot, was the most efficient out of any of these guys. And there's a lot of good wide receivers like Justin Jefferson, Tyreek Hill. These guys get moved into the slot a lot. London was better than all of them. Now, of course, this year he's going to have a new quarterback who we got a little bit of a sample with last year, and Michael Penix, the 2nd-year player, former 1st-round pick out of Washington. Michael Penix is a guy who potentially could be a massive upgrade, right? Again, we saw that for a stretch last year. Final 3 games of the season, Michael Penix started, and Drake London, one of these games without Darnell Mooney, we should point that out, though 23 fantasy points per game, 13 targets per game, 117 yards per game. During this stretch, he was either number 1 or number 2 in basically all those categories: targets, yards, fantasy points per game. He and Michael Penix were lights out. Now, it should be discussed that one of these games went to overtime. One of these games, Darnell Mooney wasn't there. They were against some of the worst defenses in the league. There wasn't a lot of tape on Michael Penix. That would be your concern this year. Can Michael Penix keep it going? But we'll have to see. The good news for Drake London is this Atlanta offense, outside of like their center Drew Dahlman being gone, it's basically the exact same offense. Target competition continues to be Darnell Mooney, who's battling an injury in camp, and Ray McCloud. Continues to be at the tight end position, Kyle Pitts. It's the exact same running backs in the backfield as well, in Tyler Algier and Bijan Robinson. The only difference is Michael Penix is going to be the starter to start this year, and there'll be like one new piece on the offensive line for the most part. So same target competition for a guy who just put up the third most targets last year. Yeah, I think he's going to probably run it back again with high volume. And if that's the case, I'm a fan of Drake London right now, where he currently goes in the late second round of fantasy drafts. Like I've said this multiple times, if you're lucky enough to get like the 6th pick in your draft, which I would consider in my one home league that I have that pick. I would consider it probably my favorite pick in drafts this year. And you could land like a CeeDee Lamb with the 6th pick, a guy who can see 170 targets this year. And then in round 2, you come back around and you get Drake London, who might be number 2 in the NFL in targets. Like there's a chance that your top 2 picks in the draft are number 1 and number 2 in targets this year. They could both be the top 2 wide receivers in fantasy. They both have great red zone roles. Yeah, I'll take that. Now, if you want to see exactly where I have Drake London ranked in my top 50 overall rankings, completely free, you can check it out, link down below, or you can head to fantasyrankingsfree.com. That takes you to this page right here where you enter your email and I'll instantly send you the top 50 rankings. They'll be broken up by tiers and show you the best and worst picks highlighted in green and red. And just by the way, in case you don't see it, there's a chance that it falls into like your spam or promotional folder, so be sure to check there. Now, if you're a serious fantasy player with a draft coming up like very soon and you want my full top 250 rankings for your entire draft, all my other drafting tools and in-season tools from draft day to championship week, well, that's why I built the Fantasy Blueprint. I use it in all my leagues and over 10,000 people are currently using it in theirs. You can learn more about the Fantasy Blueprint with the link in the description. It'll take you to this page, or you can just head to jointheblueprint.com. That is jointheblueprint.com. It'll explain basically everything you get from this so you can learn more about the blueprint, its origin story, and then you could also check out all these reviews and testimonials from people who used it last year and are now, most of them, back this year. Because over 85% of people who signed up for the blueprint last year are back this year, almost 9 out of 10, which I think is like the best metric or statistic to show you that this is a good product. 9 out of 10 people used it last year and said, yeah, I want to come back this year. It helped me. So if you want to smack around your friends this year and make them wonder how the heck did this guy get so good at fantasy, you can click the link in the description below or go to jointheblueprint.com. There are very limited spots available. We just opened up more spots a couple of days ago for more people to get in, so now's your last probably chance. And the next guy who could break fantasy this year at the quarterback position, I mean, this one almost seems obvious to me, but maybe not to everybody. It's Justin Fields, because we know he has the elite rushing upside. Like we've literally already seen this guy do it. If you look over here, his past 2 seasons as a starter, you can see top 10 in fantasy points per game, top 10 in fantasy points per game. Now last year he only had 12 fantasy points per game, but if you actually just sprinkle out his 6-game sample as a starter, he was top 10 in fantasy points per game. The problem with this stat right here, him only having 12 per game, this factors in the games where he only came in for like a couple of rush attempts here and there with Russell Wilson as the starter. But Justin Fields in his 6 games as a starter last year averaged 19.7 fantasy points per game. That would have been the QB7 on the year. And during that stretch as a starter, he did this. Averaged 40 rushing yards per game, had 5 rushing touchdowns, the most amongst any quarterback, and only 1 interception on 160 pass attempts. Plus, he completed a career high 66% of his passes, almost like 7% higher than his previous career high. And if you follow football, you know that this is what Justin Fields does. You can see his rushing yards right here. Again, only 6 games last year, he had 289. The year before that, though, 657. The year before that, when he was a breakout league-winning quarterback, over 1,100 rushing yards as a top 5 quarterback that year. Absolute beast mode, 8 rushing touchdowns in that season as well. We know what this guy does. He produces as a top 10 fantasy option on a weekly basis on average as a starter the past 3 seasons, and now he just signed a new contract with the Jets to be their starter. You can see his contract right here, 2 years, $40 million, and some of the specifics get down in this area. The total value, like we said, 2 years, $40 million. Guaranteed is $30 million, with $15 million of that coming at the signing bonus. Now, this isn't a crazy like contract like with quarterbacks these days getting $40, $50 million, but $20 million a year with $30 million guaranteed, especially with the other quarterbacks on this roster, that's enough to say, yeah, you're our guy, Fields, even if you struggle a little bit. Which is awesome news for us in fantasy, because as you can see from this Jacob Gibbs tweet over on Twitter, fantasy points per dropback dating back to 2023. So we're looking at the 2023 and 2024 season. Look at these guys up here in this list. This is the list right here of the top 8 players. Number 7 on this list is Justin Fields in fantasy points per dropback. And that's on a list that has guys like Jaden Daniels, Jalen Hurts, Lamar Jackson, Josh Allen ahead of him. Like, he's in rare company because of that rushing upside. Now, in terms of weapons, I'll be honest, there's not really much weapons here. Like, we'll see what happens with Breece Hall and his involvement in this offense. It's basically just his former teammate from Ohio State, Garrett Wilson. Then you're looking at Josh Reynolds, Allen Lazard. These guys are not what you want to be having as your starting receivers. Mason Taylor, a 2nd-round tight end, might have to step up as like the second option in this passing attack. Apparently him and Justin Fields in camp have a good chemistry right now. But at the end of the day, we know we have at least one alpha receiver in Garrett Wilson. Enough to sustain drives is what we're hoping for here. This should be a run-heavy offense where the goal is Justin Fields to push for minimum 600 rushing yards. If he stays healthy, maybe push towards 1,000 rushing yards. That's where your value is going to come from, especially based on where he currently goes in drafts. Now, the Jets offensive line as well, it's kind of usually ranked right around like 10th to 15th, so either a top 10 unit or at very worst middle of the pack right now, and that's assuming that they're going to be healthier entering this year, which as of right now is the case. For what it's worth, in the first preseason game, we got to see Justin Fields go out there. He completed 3 of 4 passes for 42 yards, averaged 10.5 yards per attempt. Okay, that's fine. It's just a limited sample, but then we got to see his wheels, right? He had the 2 carries for 14 yards and a touchdown, including that 13-yard touchdown that was very, very pretty on the run against the Green Bay Packers on their way to their first preseason win of 30-10 against Green Bay. So small sample, right? But he looked good out there. It wasn't something that was falling apart. The offensive line didn't look atrocious for their one drive that they played together. Everything looked pretty nice. So at the end of the day, like if Justin Fields is out there throwing 20 touchdowns, he's running for 7 or 8, you're getting your middle tier QB1 performance out of him. Like he's going to finish as probably, if he stays healthy, a top 8 fantasy quarterback. And this is a guy that you don't have to spend value on. Like in terms of pick, you don't have to spend a high value pick. He goes outside the top 100 players as of right now. He often goes sometimes in round 8. Most of the time you can get him in round 9 of fantasy drafts after guys like Dak Prescott. I'll take the upside of Justin Fields with his legs all day long. And the strategy would be like if you're taking an elite quarterback, sure, don't take Fields. But if you wait to take Fields in round 9, maybe you come back around in round 11 for a JJ McCarthy or Trevor Lawrence and you get 2 viable quarterbacks. If Fields struggles, well, then you plug in the other guy. Okay, the next guy who could break fantasy this year, and he's going to be rising up draft boards quickly, in my opinion, is Matthew Golden. He was a former alpha wide receiver at Texas when he transferred there last year. Despite being in a crowded offense, he still put up some very strong numbers. Let's take a look. You can see those numbers here. He only spent 1 year at Texas, but he had almost 1,000 receiving yards and averaged 17 yards per catch. Also, by the way, led the team with 9 receiving touchdowns. Again, when you look at this, you might say, okay, look, let's look at these numbers on Player Profiler. He only had 16% of his team's targets. Alpha number 1 receivers, we normally like to see that number be closer to like 24 to 30%. So what's up with the 16%? Well, he played in an offense with Isaiah Bond, who would have been an NFL player if it wasn't for legal matters, Gunnar Helm, who is now an NFL player, Jaden Blue, who is now an NFL player, and some other guys who are still in college for this team. It was a loaded offense where quarterback Quinn Ewers were scared to throw downfield half the time, it seemed, and also they would check the ball down so much to their running backs and tight end Gunnar Helm. So I think the target share thing was just kind of the nature of the offense. And not to mention, Matthew Golden kind of came along down the season, especially in their biggest games of the year. You could check out the reasons why people like him outside of the film and production. 4.29 40 time at the NFL Combine. Some people say he ran it or he was clocked a little bit faster. That's why he didn't run the second one. That could be right. Overall, though, he still ran a 4.29. At worst, based on the film that we're seeing from this guy, probably was going to run like a 4.35 40 time at worst, right? Still a very fast player on the outside who's more than just like your Christian Watson speedster, right? This is a guy who can go out there and win contested catches, but also has the route running ability to run some in-breaking routes as well with a lot of success. And now he joins a Packers offense where we already know it. We've been trying to find a number 1 receiver here for years, but Jaden Reed, who's currently dealing with his own injury, not a number 1 receiver. Romeo Doubs, not a number 1 receiver. Dontavian Wicks maybe could be if he can continue or try and be a little bit more consistent, especially with his hands. But none of these Packers wide receivers last year had 900 yards. None of them had more than 80 targets, right? This entire list. 4 different players had 600 plus receiving yards. None of them saw alpha usage. Jaden Reed came off the field in 2 wide receiver sets. Romeo Doubs was never peppered with a lot of targets. Dontavian Wicks was never consistently on the field in 2 or 3 wide receiver sets. And as I mentioned, as of right now, Jaden Reed was seen at the start of preseason with a walking boot on, and the Packers and the team and Matt LaFleur is saying that they're hopeful Jaden Reed's leg is ready for week 1. I mean, that's not a great news overall that they're hopeful that he's ready for week 1. So as of right now, if he's not ready for week 1, even more opportunity and target share out there for the first round pick, the first round pick that they spent on the receiver position in like 20 years in Matthew Golden. And here's just another point to drive home how inconsistent the Packers wide receivers were last year, and they kind of need an alpha. According to Warren Sharp Football on Twitter, you can check out the highest rate of incompleted passes due to receiver errors. So this is either running the wrong route or drops. Number 1 in the NFL, 23% of the incompletions last year for Jordan Love had to do with a Packers wide receiver error. So most of the time this is running the wrong route or having a drop. But now you can throw Matthew Golden into this offense, who there's no real concerns about his hands, at least from his film in college. There's been no concern, or even training camp, no reports that he has like hand problems in terms of catching the football. And his skill set, especially downfield with his speed, deep ball specialist in some ways, compares really well with Jordan Love, who has been top 5 in deep attempts per game each of the past 2 seasons, top 5 in explosive play rate as well last year, and 5th in red zone completion rate. So you pair that type of production and profile up that Jordan Love, when healthy, has had. Maybe they throw a little bit more this year since Love was hurt week 1 and then like week 5 last year. They throw a little bit more, a lot more downfield to a number 1 fast receiver in Golden. that starts to pan out to where you can see him break out. And we got to see everything check out in the preseason for Matthew Golden. In their first game, he played 100% of the Packers first team starter snaps, which was basically consistent with what we saw in Packers family night. You can see from my tweet. Again, note Jayden Reed and Dontavian Wicks did not play in that game due to injury, but either way, those guys did play, especially Jayden Reed in the Packers family night, where Matthew Golden was the only receiver to play 100% of the snaps and run 100% of the routes with Jordan Love. So all the information and data that we're getting right now, the team investment with the first round pick, everything that's happening in training camp and so far in preseason on the ways that they're using him and his team fit and what they need in this offense with Jordan Love, all checks out that Matthew Golden, where he currently goes in drafts, as of this recording right now, outside the top 100 picks, is like an 8th or a 9th round pick. I think by the time your drafts come, he'll be an 8th round pick, maybe a 7th round pick. Either way, I want to take stabs on this guy there. This is a player that I wouldn't be shocked by the end of the season if like next year at this time, we're drafting him in like round 4 of fantasy drafts or even earlier than that. Now, another rookie I'm interested in is Caleb Johnson of the Pittsburgh Steelers, because this guy proved last year in college at Iowa, the 22-year-old running back, that he could be a massive workhorse back. We saw this. His first 2 years there, just 151 carries, then 117 carries, and then they completely shifted the offense in 2024 to give it all to Caleb Johnson, and he showed them that he could handle it. 240 carries, over 1,500 rushing yards, 23 touchdowns. The guy was averaging nearly 7 yards per carry. In the fourth quarter alone, he was averaging over 6 yards per carry. He had over 1,000 yards after contact. Like, these are Derrick Henry type numbers. And oh yeah, coaches are also going to love the fact, and especially the Pittsburgh Steelers and Mike Tomlin, that this guy didn't fumble the ball once last year on his 240 plus carries. Now, what makes him stand out isn't just like the workload and production, but he was also efficient. He averaged 4.42 yards after contact last year and had the second most breakaway yards in the nation, which is pretty impressive considering he's 6'1", 224 pounds, and he had the second most breakaway yards. So he's ripping off these 10 and 20 plus yard runs last year. He was also clocked, like if you look at overall his testing, at 220 pounds, running a 4.57 40 time, according to Player Profiler, not bad at all. 75th percentile, pretty solid, but he actually was clocked in at running one of the higher in-game speeds in college last year at 22 miles per hour. That's like top 10 in the nation. So because of all this, Pittsburgh, who did not have a second round pick in the draft, by the way, only a first and a third round pick, and they spent their third round pick on Caleb Johnson. And as you can see from Pittsburgh right here, we already know that Najee Harris is no longer there, which is going to leave about 300 touches up for grabs in this offense. And it's an offense that the offensive coordinator is Arthur Smith. We know Arthur Smith loves to run the ball, get 2 tight ends on the field a lot. That kind of fits well with Pittsburgh's offense. So does a big running back like Caleb Johnson. And Arthur Smith also likes to run the ball with big running backs, whether it's been Derrick Henry in the past, Cordell or Patterson at times he gave plenty of carries to with the Falcons, Najee Harris over Jaylen Warren last year as well, right? We know that Arthur Smith loves to run the ball. His offense is on average ranked top 10 in rush attempts per game, and I think he's going to give it to the bigger running back this year over Jaylen Warren. Because don't get me wrong, Jaylen Warren is a talented player, no doubt about it, but in the past, although Najee Harris has never missed a game, he's left some games or been a little bit banged up or dealt with a Liz Frank injury a couple years back and was not 100% himself. Even in those outings, Jaylen Warren was never able to take over as like a workhorse running back. No coach, multiple coaches now with the Steelers have ever viewed Warren that way. I do think they view Caleb Johnson that way because they've already been saying it this offseason that they view him as a 3-down back, a guy who can go out there on early downs and on third downs and operate for them. So even if Jaylen Warren comes out this year and gets 150 touches again, right? Like, let's look at it. Last year, he ended up getting 120 carries and like 38 receptions. Even if he does that again, heck, give him a couple more carries. Give him like 150 carries and like 40 receptions, 180, 190 touches. That shouldn't really factor into any situation where that's hurting Caleb Johnson from seeing his own 250 to 300 touches. And now the Steelers offensive line enters this year healthier, and they have a new quarterback in Aaron Rodgers, who I don't think it's prime Aaron Rodgers, but I think it's better than what they had last year, which should only help sustain drives and get to the red zone, which should lead to touchdowns, hopefully, for Caleb Johnson. Now, I should point out that in the first preseason game for the Steelers, surprisingly, Kenneth Gainwell started. He played like 4 snaps over Caleb Johnson, played 4 snaps and left the game. I'm just going to assume that this didn't really mean anything. Like, this is just them putting Kenneth Gainwell out there, maybe the veteran, or maybe they liked what they saw. They just kind of wanted to see what he looked like with the starters. I'm going to assume that the third round pick with more draft capital than they signed Kenneth Gainwell for this offseason is going to be the guy, right, over Kenneth Gainwell. So we'll monitor this the rest of preseason, but as of right now, not concerned by that. If anything, maybe people do get concerned and Caleb Johnson drops a little bit. He currently goes as the 69th overall pick. He's like a 6th round, maybe a 7th round pick in your draft. I feel pretty solid about that for a guy who has a somewhat clear path to like 250 touches. Now, before we get into the next player that could break fantasy football this year, I have to point out just how valuable late round wide receivers can be in a full PPR format like DraftKings Best Ball, where you have to start 3 wide receivers. Because let's take a guy like Matthew Golden, who we talked about earlier, right? This is a guy who currently, if we pull up DraftKings Best Ball ADP, McConkey, he currently goes right now in like the 7th round of drafts as the wide receiver 41. He goes as the 76th overall player, and he's the perfect type of receiver that you want to target in the middle of later rounds because this is a guy who is extremely explosive. He has a high target upside like we talked about. No clear number one receiver in Green Bay. Some guys dealing with injuries right now, and he's not costing you a premium early pick. Now, I've teamed up with DraftKings this year, and they currently have an awesome offer. Draft one, get one. Just enter the $20 $15 million best ball contest, and you'll score another ticket to play free for a share of $15 million. And when you do that, just make sure you sign up with promo code SAL. Now, if you're not familiar, DraftKings Best Ball is a fantasy game type where you draft your team once, there's no waivers, no trades, and no setting your lineups. And honestly, that's what makes DraftKings Best Ball so much fun. It is the best part of fantasy, which is drafting. You just draft your team, then you watch it ride all year long. So make sure you're targeting those later round high upside wide receivers in a PPR format, and also make sure you're targeting a guy like Trey McBride in those types of formats because, oh my God, I mean, this guy had over 100 receptions easily last year. And if you start to look at it, Trey McBride, the last 2 seasons, top 10 tight end, number 2 tight end last year, despite only scoring 2 touchdowns, which is crazy. Eventually, he's going to stop scoring just 2 touchdowns, especially when he has 111 catches, right? This guy had 111 receptions last year with just 2 touchdowns. Surely that's going to start to translate to like these 6, maybe even 10 touchdown seasons. This is a guy who last year, believe it or not, he had the most targets inside the 10-yard line amongst tight ends and still only had 2 touchdowns. That is eventually going to start to turn. He had plays called back by penalty. He was tackled at the 1-yard line. His foot was barely out of bounds. All these things were going against McBride last year, and he was still the number 2 tight end in fantasy. And if you were to just take after him returning from an injury from week 5 on last year, those final 13 games, McBride averaged 16.7 fantasy points per game. This is the crazy part. 7.5 catches, not targets, catches per game, and 78 receiving yards per game. He was an absolute monster. He posted just 1 single-digit performance during this time. He ranked first amongst tight ends in receptions and yards during that stretch. He was just a beast. He got healthy and he was a beast. Again, all while not scoring touchdowns, which is like the craziest part. Imagine this production profile with 10 touchdowns. You're talking about a first-round caliber pick that you could take in round 3. And when you talk about the target competition, it's basically the same as last year. Like, you're going to run it back with your top 2 wide receivers being Marvin Harrison and Michael Wilson. Okay, maybe that there's some talk that Zay Jones is pushing Michael Wilson for wide receiver 2 reps right now. Either way, like, that's not a threatening position for whether it's Michael Wilson or Zay Jones for Trey McBride's target share. Maybe the whole goal here would be that Marvin Harrison takes a step forward in year 2. Even if he does, even if Marvin Harrison takes a step forward in year 2, like, how much of a step is it going to be? Trey McBride, in my opinion, is the locked-in number 1 option on this team. It also helps now that Kyler Murray is another year removed from his injury. He's healthy coming into this year. The offensive system remains stable, bringing back the same offensive coordinator. And Trey McBride himself, not only does he have the same coach, the same quarterback who's healthy right now, he also just signed a 4-year, $76 million contract extension. I think that shows that, yeah, not only is it a priority for this team now and in the future, but he's the priority. And I really like this tweet from David, Guru Fantasy World on Twitter. Check this out. He says, if you simply gave Trey McBride his expected touchdowns of 8 last year, he would have averaged 17.9 fantasy points per game, more than CeeDee Lamb, Nico Collins, and A.J. Brown, who are all either first or second round picks this year. Crazy that he was expected based on his volume to see 8 touchdowns and only had 2. Massively unlucky. He had a phenomenal season. When Trey McBride was a 2nd round pick, I wasn't interested, but now he goes as the 27th overall pick in the 3rd round. I like that a lot because, look, I just wasn't going to be taking Trey McBride over Ladd McConkey. I wasn't going to be taking him personally over guys like Drake London, Bucky Irving, A.J. Brown. But now that he goes in round 3 and you can start building out some teams where maybe you land a Drake London, you land a Christian McCaffrey in round 1. You maybe have the number 1 overall receiver, number 1 overall running back, and now maybe the number 1 overall tight end in round 3. That's a nice start. Now, before we get into this next player who could break fantasy, a running back in like round 4 or 5 who is massively undervalued, make sure you hit the subscribe button. Our goal is to get to 200,000 subscribers. We are so close. When you subscribe, it really helps this content be reached by more people, and it just goes a longer way. It allows me to put out more content, better content for all of you. Take 2 seconds. Some people don't realize they're not subscribed. I would really appreciate that. Now, that running back I'm talking about is going to be Kenneth Walker, who, look, I get it. Right now, there's like this foot injury that's happening in camp. We'll get into that in a little bit, but it's kind of been a mixed bag with him in his career, right? When he's healthy, he's elite, but that's the biggest question, is when he's healthy. Because according to RotoViz, when Kenneth Walker was healthy last year, his first 7 games, over 19 fantasy points per game. He was a top 10 running back. He had over 4 receptions per game, which was beastly. This is a guy who is not known for catching passes. And last year, the dude was like a top 10 running back in terms of receptions and pass catching and all this involvement, maybe even better than that. And despite the injuries last year, he still led every single running back who had at least 150 carries in missed tackles forced per attempt. So he was breaking tackles left and right. Okay, let's pull up the next stat here that I think is pretty interesting to look at. In terms of design targets per game, we know that this is a guy who can break tackles. He's a good runner. But in pass past seasons, we've never seen these design targets be there for one Kenneth Walker. According to Fantasy Points data, you got guys like Alvin Kamara, Rashad White, Bucky Irving, proven pass catching running backs. Number 6 on this list, tied for number 5, is Kenneth Walker. And all we're hearing this year with new offensive coordinator Clint Kubiak coming in is like, yeah, Kenneth Walker's a guy. Yeah, he's a 3-down back. Oh, we're going to love to put him in this zone running scheme on 1st and 2nd down, keep him out there on 3rd down. Like, there's no talk of Zach Charbonnet. It's all Kenneth Walker's workload. Not only did they get a new offensive coordinator as well in Clint Kubiak, everything else has changed. DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett are now gone. Geno Smith is now gone. You're talking about brand new wide receiver core with Cooper Kupp and MVS joining JSN, brand new quarterback in Sam Darnold. I mean, the only thing here that has stayed consistent, like there's even a new tight end in Elijah Arroyo, a rookie with Noah Fant cut. It's the backfield. It's Kenneth Walker is the only thing here that's remained consistent. It should be an improved offensive line when you spend a 1st-round pick on a guard in Gray Zabel. You go out there and you get tackle Josh Jones as well in free agency. In general, other than those additions, just getting healthier. So like if the only thing, especially to start the year, is your running game that has like some sort of gel and cohesiveness from past seasons, I think they're probably going to lean on that. As I mentioned, there is a legitimate running back in this backfield in Zach Charbonnet. Anytime Kenneth Walker misses time, Zach Charbonnet becomes a top 10 fantasy option in a week-to-week basis at the RB position. That's why he is a valuable player to be taking later on in drafts, but I don't think there's any question here if he's going to like be splitting a workload with a new offensive coordinator. We've seen it in past years. Anytime Kenneth Walker misses time, Zach Charbonnet dominates. The second Kenneth Walker comes back, Zach Charbonnet goes to being a backup, getting 6 to 8 touches per game. There's also this helpful tweet from Guru Fantasy World on Twitter that says, did you know Zach Charbonnet didn't see more than 10 touches in a single game that Kenneth Walker played last year, and it actually hasn't happened once in his entire 33-game career. So when Kenneth Walker is active, Zach Charbonnet has never seen 10 touches. So in the past, we've never seen Charbonnet steal work from Kenneth Walker, significant work. And as of right now, everything that Coach Clint Kubiak, offensive coordinator, is saying is that this is not anything to do with Zach Charbonnet's backfield, all to do with Kenneth Walker. And by the way, Clint Kubiak, this is a very nice tweet here from Bryce over on Twitter. You can see that he says, Clint Kubiak, when he's been an offensive coordinator in 2024 with the Saints, Alvin Kamara was his running back, 21 touches per game, 19 fantasy points per game, was a top 10 running back. 2021 with the Vikings, and he had Dalvin Cook as his running back, 21 touches per game, 16 fantasy points per game, was a borderline top 12 running back. Now you're going to get Kenneth Walker, who's still in the prime of his career, when healthy, as recent as last year, was a top 10 running back over that stretch of games. This feels really nice for Walker. We also like to see Ian Harden's tweet here in terms of the easiest running back schedules this year. You can see number 1 all the way up top and to the left, Arizona, New Orleans, San Francisco, Carolina, and then Seattle and Kenneth Walker has a top 5, the 5th easiest schedule this year. So you're talking about an easy schedule, offensive coordinator who wants to use him, likely an improved offensive line. This is a good spot for Kenneth Walker. Now, the biggest thing we have to watch is what this tweet right here from Brady Henderson says. Kenneth Walker was out again. He missed time earlier in camp with a foot soreness. Doesn't sound like there's anything new or another injury here. Mike McDonald said, we had a plan for Ken and we're sticking to that plan. So he's not practicing with this foot issue, but it's not something that's new. They're just being very cautious. At least that's what they're telling us right now. If we get to like the first week of the season when they actually have to put injury reports out and he's on the injury report, then I'll be concerned. But as of right now, they're just saying they're being cautious with him. They have a plan. There's no reason to put him out there in camp right now if they don't want to risk anything. I won't lie, that does make me a little bit nervous, but again, right now it's nothing major. We're still, as of this recording, like 3 weeks away from week 1. So with all that said, Kenneth Walker, who currently goes in round 4 of fantasy drafts as the 44th overall player, late round 4, sometimes he goes in round 5. I love this. I mean, this is a guy who, if you really wanted to be risky, let's say you take in round 1 Christian McCaffrey, and then your next 3 picks are wide receivers, or maybe 2 wide receivers and an elite quarterback like Jalen Hurts in round 4. Then you can maybe come back around in round 5, and your RB2 could be Kenneth Walker, a guy who was a borderline top 5 running back when healthy last year. I like that. So if you're able to land like 2, maybe even 3 of these guys in your fantasy leagues this year, the ceiling of your team and the championship caliber goes through the roof. Because not only are some of these guys like quote unquote value picks, but they're value picks who have insane upsides. Stable floors, worst case scenario, they just get you what you ask for where you take them, but all the upside in the world that can win you leagues. These are 7 players that I feel really confident in this year, especially when we look at their ceilings. But if you want to see the 5 running backs this year that I would bet my house on, well, you can check out this video right here. This is going to help you discover the best running backs in fantasy football drafts this year. Make sure you watch that one.